The topic we would be discussing today is the media deviancy and crime. And while we discuss this particular topic, we're actually evaluating the models of media effect. In the previous lesson, we had spoken about media effect, and we had spoken about five different models that helped us understand how different school of thoughts, how different sociologists see the media can affect an individual's behavior. If you recall, there were five different models that we had discussed. The first one was the hypodermic syringe model, which we had referred to as the direct model. After that, we had spoken about the two-step flow model, followed by the uses and gratification model, followed by the reception analysis model, which is also referred to as the normative model, and towards the end we had spoken about cultural model. So the first model, that is the hypodermic syringe model, was or is referred to as the direct model, and the other four, namely two-step flow model, uses and gratification model, reception analysis model, also referred to as the normative model, and towards the end, cultural model. These four uh, models that I just named, they come under the heading of indirect models. Now, the question is, let's evaluate these models. And while evaluating this model, the topic we'd be taking under discussion today over here is the media deviancy and crime. Now, first and foremost, it is pretty important that we understand what the word deviancy over here means, and how is it that the word deviancy is how the word deviance is different from the word crime. Now, when we use the word deviance refers to an act that is not socially acceptable, an act that is not acceptable in a society at a particular time, place, and situation. So, if you're talking about an act that is not acceptable in a society in a particular time, place, and situation, we refer to that act as a deviant act. However, when we use the word crime, criminal acts are usually deviant acts, but criminal acts are acts that go against the legal system of any particular society. So the extent to which the media, we talk about the relationship between media deviancy and crime. Now, I'd like to start this off with this amazing idea that was put forward by Pearson. Pearson in the year 1983. Pearson argued that we see the public as being both fearful and fascinated by crime. According to Pearson, we see public being both fearful and fascinated by crime. And in virtually all societies, the media have sought to satisfy the public's apparently near insatiable appetite. So, according to Pearson's, public in general, consumers in general, could be readers, listeners, viewers, they have this endless appetite towards sensationalism. The more they say they're fearful of it, the more they see the more we see them fearing when it comes to criminal activities, the more of fascination they show. So according to Pearson's, the public are both fearful of and fascinated by crime. Now, taking this ahead, in this unit, we will examine some of the alleged effects of the media's coverage of crime and deviance. How is it that the media has covered crime and deviance, and what sort of impact it has had on the society? Now, let's take this ahead and talk about media violence and real life violence. Now, if we speak about, or when we speak about media violence and real life violence, back in the 1960s, this American psychologist, Albert Bandura, if you have studied AS psychology, you would know who Bandura is. Even if you talk about AS sociology, in AS sociology, while teaching laboratory experiments in AS, we do teach about Bandura's research. So this classic research that was conducted by Bandura, Ross and Ross, this is an example of, I mean, through this example or through this research, we can look at the direct cause and effect relationship between media content and violence. And this again can be linked to the hypodermic syringe model, which a couple of minutes earlier I referred to as the direct model. So this research that was conducted by Bandura, what exactly was this research on? Now, back in the 1960s, the American society, or America, in the United States of America, television was gaining popularity. And as television was gaining popularity, it was a major concern to know what if the content that is shown on the television might be acted upon by children. Being specific, we're talking about the impact media's, or portrayal of media, or representation of media, or showing, portrayal of violence, or portrayal of violence or showing violence, what sort of an impact that would this showing violence have on individuals, specifically children. So this research that was conducted by Bandura, Ross and Ross, what exactly happened over here was there were some these kids that this research was being conducted on. They showed them they showed three groups of children real film and cartoon examples of self-writing doll, that is a bobo doll. I'm sure when young you must have played with a bobo doll. You might if not you, your siblings or your cousins might have had a bobo doll as a toy. So what Bandura was trying to figure out was that if we show kids violence by there being a boba doll and someone hitting the boba doll, what likelihood is there that the behavior that is shown to the kids would be repeated or would be mimicked or would be imitated by the kids, right? So the three groups who were shown the violent activity, whether real film or cartoon, all behaved more aggressively than the fourth group, that is the control group that was not shown violence. So through this research that was conducted by Bandura, Ross and Ross, what the researcher or what we trying to pick up on is that yes, have been there have been researches that have been conducted in the past that show us that showing violence on television can actually result in increasing violence in the society, specifically especially for children. Now over here, Bandura and colleagues concluded that violent media content could lead to imitation or copycat violence. What does the word copycat violence mean over here? Copycat violence, or in other words, violence which mimics an earlier violent episode. Now, in a similar vein, let's talk about another study that was conducted by McCabe and Kimberley. Not a study exactly, but there's this concept that I'd like to discuss here. We're talking about the disinhibition effect. Now, what exactly is this disinhibition effect? Now, disinhibition, before we understand this, we need to understand what the word inhibit means. So when we use the word inhibit means to stop. And disinhibition means something that reduces the power of inbuilt barriers to act in a deviant or criminal way. So in this particular context, we're talking about how when violence is shown in the media as a way, as a mechanism to be to deal with problems. Now, even if you talk about cinema, if you talk about the Hollywood or the Bollywood cinema, you see how the heroes they end up using violence to get their way through. So even when and at the same time, they it is shown to be a very heroic act. So according to McCabe and Martin, according to Gregory McCabe and Kimberly Martin in the year 2005, they argue that imitation was likely that imitation was a likely outcome of media violence, because often it is the hero who uses violence to deal with the problem. So if you're seeing using violence as a way, as a mechanism to deal with a problem, in other words, you are you're consequently encouraging, or you consequently leading towards an disinhibition effect. It convinces children that in some social situations, the normal rules that govern conflict and differences can be suspended. That is, discussion and negotiation can be replaced with violence. So, summing it up, the disinhibition effect, if you show violence on television and if you show heroes or heroines or the main character in a movie, in a series, in a drama, in an episode, in a soap opera, using violence to deal with a particular problem, you're, in other words, encouraging people to do that as well. Now, one, we spoke about Bandura, Ross and Ross. Number two, we spoke about McCabe and Kimberly Martin. Number three, let's talk about the idea of desensitization that was put forward by Elizabeth Newson. Now, what does this word desensitization over here mean? When and as we use the word desensitization, desensitization is an effect which dampens the emotional impact of something which would otherwise be distressing, such as viewing violent behavior. Now, as we use the word desensitization, us as a nation, if I talk about us Pakistanis, we've become so desensitized to violence, we've become so desensitized to criminal acts, because every now and then, whenever we're switching on a television or when we're scrolling through our our social media news feed, we see how often there are instances of violence. We get to hear about people being killed through a traffic accident, people being killed because of any XYZ dispute, which might even be trivial. So, getting desensitized, in other words, in a simplistic manner, means when you lose the sensitivity towards criminal activities, when you lose the sensitivity towards violence. So, a third alleged consequence of media violence over here is desensitization. Elizabeth Newson noted that children and teenagers are subjected to thousands of killing and acts of violence as they grow up through viewing television and films. She suggested that such prolonged exposure to media violence may have a drip effect on young children. Now, as I use the word, as we discussed, as we use this word drip effect over here, remember the last we spoke about this word drip effect was when we were discussing the cultural effect model in the previous lesson. So, cultural effect model. Now, just in case if you uh, do not know these different models, I believe you should first go and watch the video on the media effect. There are, I believe, three videos on the same topic. The most recent was from yesterday. And I mean, go through them and you'd understand what these media effects, what these media models are. So, the drip effect, in other words, if you keep on showing young children violence, this would eventually lead to them being desensitized towards violence. In other words, they would become socialized into accepting violent behavior as normal, especially as a problem solving device. Now, there are several examples that we have over here as well. These examples, they are real world examples, and hence you could gain marks while writing them in the examination. Because remember, your assessment objective 2, that is AO2, marks you or grades you or rewards you on the extent to which you're able to not only interpret the sociological knowledge you've gained, but at the same time to be able to apply it to real world situations as well. So there can be no disputing the claim that real life violence can and does mimic media violence. There are numerous examples that are available. For example, in 1995, two 18-year-olds, Sarah Edmondson and her then boyfriend, Benjamin Darris, went on a violent crime spree in the southern USA following repeated viewing of the film Natural Born Killers. So we're talking about figuring out a correlation, a relationship between people watching violence on the television and then them acting upon it in real life. So Darius shot and killed a businessman in Mississippi, and Edmondson shot and wounded a store clerk in Louisiana. Similarly, in 2014, so there's this one example we have from 1995. There's this another example that we'd be discussing over here from 2014. So this example from 2014 now. Similarly, in 2014, 16-year-old Stephen Miles stabbed his girlfriend to death in his bedroom in Surrey, England, and then dismembered her body, mimicking the actions of Dexter, a vigilante serial killer in a cult US TV series. Again, we're talking about a correlation over here between people watching a television series, between individuals being exposed to violence on a television series and then them acting accordingly. So stabbing your girlfriend to death in a bedroom and then dismembering her body. These examples, you want to use these examples, use them. You want to use any contemporary example that is well known and can easily be traced through Google, use that example. So taking this ahead, however, the claim that these screen depictions of homicidal violence caused real life killings need to be treated with caution. Now, as we just spoke about these two examples over here, we also need to be cautious and careful that these are just correlations, these are not causations. So, correlations do not necessarily mean or does not necessarily prove causation. I mean, we could say there can be a relationship between these two factors, such as viewing violence on the television and then acting in a violent matter in real life. But we cannot claim that we cannot claim that there is any causation to it, or one thing happening does not necessarily mean the other would happen too. For instance, if we talk about this cult United States TV series Dexter, there might be thousands of people who might have watched this, and not everyone who watched this ended up killing other people. So first, the correlation does not necessarily prove causations. The direction of cause and effect could be the other way around as well. Homicidally inclined people, or people who have violence as a part of the personality, they might be attracted to watching screen violence, which again could be a reason. The third could be could be mental stability as well. Say, or childhood abuse may lead to both a taste for screen violence and murderous tendencies. So what I need you all to pick on from here is an evaluative aspect, that is AO3, that is evaluation and analysis, assessment objective AO3. Now over here we're talking about how we should always have our sociological lens put on, how we should not pick up on, or how we should not give in to anything that we come across. So yes, without any denial, there was a correlation, but we cannot say that there has been a causation, or we cannot say that one thing would necessarily or definitely cause another or lead to another. The second point that we could use, and using this point gain marks while evaluating, the second point over here is recognizing that violent acts mimicked those viewed on screen still leave unexplained why these specific people acted in this murderous way when the vast majority of viewers of Dexter and Natural Born Killers did not subsequently kill others. Finally, the question has to be asked, would these or similar fatal actions have been carried out at some point by those convicted, whether or not they had viewed these instances of screen violence? So what about the people who convicted? What about the people who are already going through a trial? What about the people who are already behind the bar? Let's go and ask them if it was violence through the television that led to all of this. So clearly we never know for sure, but at the very least it has a count as a distinct possibility. So we can never be sure, but nonetheless, yes, there is a possibility. So there's another example that we could use that would show us that this is a correlation indeed, and there is no direct causal relationship. This word I'm using over here is causal and not casual. So there's no direct causal relationship. For instance, if I give you an example over here, for example, studies that have looked at affected, how children are affected when television first arrives in a society, have found that there was little change. Over here, we have an example from St. Helena. This was a British colony in the South Atlantic Ocean. They received television for the first time in 1995. Not before that. Before 1995, they did not have television. So before and after studies showed there was no change in children's social behavior. And this has been this idea has been supported by Tony Charlton et al. In the year 2000. Similarly, Richard Rhodes in the year 2000 found that violent crime rate in Europe and Japan either stayed the same or declined in the years following the introduction of television. So we have two examples over here. The first example by, or rather say from St. Helena. The second example is from Europe and Japan. And if you talk about a comparison of the crime rate pre television and post television, there hasn't been much of a change. Now, taking this ahead, if we talk about another point, this idea of lynch mob mentality that was initiated by Cumberbatch in the year 2004. So Cumberbatch in the year 2004 looked at over 3,500 research studies into the effects of screen violence, encompassing film, television, video, and more recently, computer and video games. So we're talking about researches on the effects of screen violence. Cumberbatch states that if one conclusion is possible, it is that the jury is still out. It's never been in. Media violence has been subjected to a lynch mob mentality with almost any evidence used to prove guilt. In other words, there is still no conclusive evidence either way that violence shown in the media influences or changes people's behavior. So according to Cumberbatch, who looked at 3,500 research studies, that's a huge, huge number. So Cumberbatch in the year 2004 looked at data from 3,500 research studies into the effects of screen violence and concluded that there is no conclusive evidence. There's no conclusive evidence either way that the violence shown in media influences or changes people's behavior. So this has been the conclusion, or you might as well drag it up from here. Now, having said that, if we take this further, another aspect that we'd like discussing under this particular topic. So we now talk about the relationship between moral panic and deviancy amplification. Before we proceed, we need to understand what these terms moral panic and deviancy amplification over here mean. As I use the word moral panic is a term used for a situation when apparently the media has been overemphasizing or overrepresenting any particular social issue so much to the extent that it leads to panic amongst people in a society. The word we're using over here is moral panic. The extent to which media shows something so much that people end up feeling scared. People end up uh, getting end up panicking. So the relationship between moral panics and deviancy amplification, the word deviancy amplification over here again suggests, I at the beginning of the lesson I tried explaining you what the word deviancy means. Comes from the word deviancy comes from the word deviant, and a deviant act is an act that is not acceptable in a society at a particular time, place, and situation. So, having said that, the relationship between moral panics and deviancy amplification. There are two further alleged effects of the media's representation of crime and deviance, which have received considerable attention from sociologists. They are moral panics, which have to do with how the media can affect public opinion, and deviancy amplification, which is concerned with how the media can affect behavior. So, moral panic, as in the impact media could have on public opinion to the point that they experience, they get into a panic, and deviancy amplification, which has more to do with how the media has the potential and the tendency to affect individuals' behavior. So, deviancy amplification, as this says, is a social process in which actions intended to reduce deviance have the opposite effect. So, we're talking about there being actions taken, and these actions to apparently reduce violence actually work the other way around. They end up increasing violence in a particular society. So, taking this ahead, the term moral panic was popularized by Stan Cohen. So, wherever you're using the word moral panic, remember this particular word was coined by Stan Cohen. Who is Stan Cohen over here? He is a sociologist and a criminologist who passed away in 2013. And he was a professor of sociology at the LSE, that is London School of Economics. And yeah, so taking this ahead, the term moral panic was popularized by Stan Cohen in his classic work, Folk Devils and Moral Panics, the creation of the mods and rockers. Now, yesterday I had shared a video on mods and rockers with you all, and it was a 5-minute video. I'd like to assume you all watched it. If you cannot trace that video, just go on YouTube, type mods and rockers, and you'd understand this entire thing real well. I mean, there are many, many videos that are there. You don't have to get into a video that's super long. I mean, 5 to 6 minutes videos, I think they would help you understand the concept. So when we speak about mods and rockers, who exactly were these mods and rockers? These mods and rockers, this was a sub culture back in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken, which gained a lot of popularity, and which actually gained a lot of popularity amongst people. And this attention that they received was primarily through the media, which eventually with, let's just say, let's give the media a benefit of doubt over here. Even when the media was trying to reduce, or when the media was trying to report instances of violence and deviance, uh, so that there could be action taken and these instances could be reduced, it actually worked the other way around. So which eventually led to more of deviancy and more of crime. Like the term deviancy amplification, understand there are two terms. To amplify means to increase. Deviancy amplification means deviancy increase. Now, how is it that deviancy is being increased? I'm saying this again. The idea that when there are different steps that are taken to reduce deviance in a particular society, it actually ends up working the other way around, or in an opposite manner. In other words, we're talking about how deviancy increases by the way media reports it. I hope it's clear. Taking this ahead, the term refers to widespread feelings of anxiety and concern held by the general public, which develops when, in Cohen's word, a condition, an episode a condition, an episode, person, or group of persons emerge to become defined as a threat to societal values and interests. So the more the media emphasizes on a particular condition, a particular event, a particular activity, a particular episode, a particular person, a particular social group, the more the media keeps on talking about it, the more chances there are that the people would start fearing, the more chances there are that people that it would create panic within a society. Now, having said that, if I take this ahead, let's talk about a couple of characteristics of moral panics. Now, again, you're an A-level sociology student, you're an A-level student, and if you're studying A2s, a couple of months down the lane, you're expected to go attend classes in a university. So understand the way you're being questioned, understand the marking mechanism. Now, the questions that you get in your CI paper 4, if I talk about media and specific over here, it would just be a statement. It would just be a statement, and you'd be asked to evaluate that statement. No one's going to ask you who coined the word moral panic. No one's going to ask you to pinpoint or to elaborate or to outline the 5 distinguishing features of moral panic. So, if anything, we're just reading through this so that one, we could have a better understanding. Number two, if while writing answers, could put these references to use. So, according to Good and Yehuda in 1994, there are 5 distinguishing features of moral panic. And what 5 distinguishing features are they? Number 1, concern. Number 2, hostility. Number 3, consensus. Number 4, disproportionality. Number 5, volatility. Now, when we speak about concern, the idea is, or the belief is, that the behavior of a group or activity is deemed deviant, is likely to have a negative effect on society. So if the media shows you something and shows it to you in a manner that you make to believe that a particular act that the media is showing you would eventually have a negative effect on the society, this is of course very alarming and very concerning. Number 2, the second feature put forward by Good and Ben Yehuda. The second point over here, the second feature is hostility. Now, what does the word hostility over here mean? Hostility toward the group in question develops and then come to be seen as folk devils. People start showing hostility towards that particular group. The group that the media has been portraying or over portraying or over representing in a negative manner, people start seeing them as folk devils. What does the word folk devil over here mean? When we use the word folk devil, we are talking about, as we use the word folk devil, we're talking about a particular group of individuals or a particular individual being shown as in a negative manner, to the point that people start seeing that particular individual or that particular group as a threat to the society. Number 3, consensus, the third feature that leads to a moral panic. There must be widespread agreement that the group in question poses a real threat to the society. Now, when I use the word consensus over here, or uh, when we use the word consensus here, the general idea over here is it isn't just you, or let's just say your family members or your social network, who believes that the group that the media has been showing over and over again in a negative manner is a threat to the society. There should be widespread agreement. Many people in that particular society, understand the word consensus. The word consensus means mutual agreement, or the point that there's mutual agreement within a society that the group that is being the group that is being shown on, or the group that is being talked about, or the group that has received a lot of attention from the media is actually a real threat to the society as a whole. Number 4, disproportionality. Now, what does the word disproportionality over here mean? The level of anxiety and concern is disproportionate to the actual threat posed by the accused group. Now, we're not saying that accused group is not hostile. We're not saying that accused group is super naive and innocent. But then again, the extent to which the media starts talking about that particular group, that particular incident, that particular individual, they make it sound like everyone who is listening to that news is under threat. So yes, there is threat, but the threat is disproportionately portrayed through the media, which of course leads to individuals feeling anxious. The level of anxiety and concern is disproportionate to the actual threat posed by the accused group. The fifth point over here is volatility. What does the word volatility over here mean? Moral panics are highly volatile. They're unstable. They come, they go. They are very short-lived. People want to read, people want to view, people want to hear about things that are spicy, that cause sensationalism. So moral panics are highly volatile and they tend to disappear as quickly as they've appeared due to a waning in public interest or news media turning their attention elsewhere. So today the media has picked up one social issue, tomorrow they'd want another because they wouldn't want people to get bored. Without realizing, or maybe intentionally, they're doing this, they end up affecting the mental health of individuals who are consuming this media. Now, moral panics are linked to the concept of deviancy amplification. The concept was coined by Leslie Wilkins in 1967. So, this idea of deviancy amplification was coined by Wilkins in the year 1967 and draws upon the labeling theory notion that the social reaction, now understand this part, the social reaction to deviant behavior can unintentionally and ironically actually make it worse. I repeat, the social reaction to deviant behavior can unintentionally and ironically make it even worse. Now, what does this mean when what does this mean when I say this? So when we or as we speak about when we or as we speak about deviancy amplification, the idea, the notion over here is that the social reaction or the way the society or the way the viewers they react to a deviant behavior can unintentionally make things even worse. So it could, for example, attract more people to engage in this form of deviancy or encourage those already involved to become more deviant. Now, this idea of deviancy amplification was initiated, was coined, was put forward by Wilkins in the year 1967. Taking this further, let's talk about this. Let's discuss this term fantasy crime. Now, what does the word fantasy crime over here mean? A fantasy crime wave is an imaginary increase in crime. Now, there's a possibility that the more the media showed a particular criminal activity, the more the media showed a particular criminal activity, the more people, yeah, there's a possibility that the more the media showed a particular criminal activity, the more pressure the law enforcement agencies had on them. Because of course, I mean, ahead we'd talk about moral entrepreneurs as well. The term moral entrepreneur, just keep that in your mind for now. So the more a social problem is shown on the media, the more chances there are that the law enforcing agencies, they would feel pressurized to act upon it. And while in pressure, they might have more of police force or policing that is dedicated to identification and conviction of that particular crime, which might consequently lead to more. See, now, the more the media showed it, the more moral panic it created. The more moral panic it created amongst the individuals within a society, there would be some individuals who would be referring to as the moral entrepreneurs. These moral entrepreneurs could be these could be social workers, these could be police representatives, these could be, I mean, people from different walks of life who would actually raise a concern in front of law enforcement agencies, that they'd be like, how is it that we're safe? If someone could go through this, probably we're next, which automatically puts the law enforcement agencies under pressure. And when they're under pressure, they would eventually allocate more of resources. There would be more of policing. And guess what? More of policing means more of that particular crime being identified. The more crime that is identified, the more it would reflect in crime statistics, and which eventually would validate the initial prophecy that was made by the media. Right at the beginning, the media said, oh, see, this is a concern, this is a problem. They showed it a lot. It led to people feeling panicked, people getting into panic, people feeling anxious about it. Moral entrepreneurs raise concerns. The law enforcement agencies feel pressurized, politicians feel pressurized. There are more of resources that are allocated to detect or to uh, to 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 to, uh, to detect or to identify or to get hold of people who are involved in such crime. And the more resources that are allocated, of course, that might result in more of people being uh, caught and sent behind bars. So eventually, this entire process, this is also referred to as the deviance amplification spiral. It's more like a spiral. It's more like a vicious circuit that goes on and on and on. So the more people are caught with that particular crime, the more the media's initial prophecy, the initial prediction, the initial uh, prophecy, again is a better word, gets validated. So yeah, Young in the year 1971 called a fantasy crime wave, which occurs when there is no real increase in the deviant behavior, but where there appears to be an increase, either because the police devote more effort to detection, thereby uncovering more instances, or because the public become more willing to report instances as victims or witnesses, thereby inflating the crime statistics. I hope you've all understood this. Now, taking this ahead, moral panics go through a number of stages with the media implicated at every stage. Now, I repeat, you are not an O-level student and you're not expected to learn all of these steps. Yeah, you're not expected to learn all of these steps. So yeah, knowing these stages would help you write answers better. That's it. So moral panics go through a number of stages which the media implicated at every stage. The first stage, now I've pretty much explained this entire thing to you. I'm just reading it out over here so that there is no confusion whatsoever. Now, taking this ahead, the first step, the news media, especially the tabloid press, report on a particular activity or incident or social group using sensationalist and exaggerated language and headlines. Number two, moral panics, for example, politicians, religious leaders, social workers, and so on, they react to media reports and make statements condemning that particular group or activity, labeling them as folk devils. They insist that the police, courts, and government then take action. Number three, the media oversimplifies the reasons why the group or activity has appeared. For example, young people being out of control, a lack of respect for authority, a decline in morality, and so on. And follow up articles demonize the group as a social problem or a folk devil. That is, the media give them particular characteristics, focusing particularly on their dress and behavior, which helps the general public and police to identify them more easily. The fourth step, the authorities stamp down hard on the group or activity. They go hard on the group. They allocate more of resources. There is more police stopping. There's more of searching. There are more of arrests that get reported. So the authorities stamp down hard on the group or activity. This may take the form of the police stopping, searching, and arresting those associated with the activity. The courts severely punishing those convicted of the activity, or the government bringing in new laws to control the activity or group. The reporting of incidents associated with the group or activity to the police by the general public rises as the group or activity becomes more visible in the public consciousness. The media reports the arrests and convictions that result from the moral panic, thereby fulfilling the initial media prophecy or prediction that the group or activity would be seen as a social problem. The seventh step, the group may react to the moral panic, over policing, and so on by becoming more deviant in protest, or the activity may go underground where it becomes more difficult to police or to control. Now, over here, we spoke about a process that I had already explained to you. This is about the the youth subculture mods and rockers that I told you had gained popularity back in the 1960s. When you could YouTube this and you'd understand how amazingly media had played its role in terms of labeling these young boys as uh, labeling these young boys as folk devils. So Like I said, we had used the word deviancy amplification spiral. What is this? This is a vicious circle in which attempts to control deviance feedback on themselves produces increased deviance. Now, the entire process that I explained to you, a spiral or a vicious circle in which the more you attempt to control deviance, the more you end up producing it or increasing it. So, having said that, there's an example over here. I mean, you could read through this if you feel like. I believe there are other examples, other better examples that we've discussed that would be enough for you to be able to write an answer to a 35-mark question. So next, let's speak about model panics and deviancy amplification, a critique. A number of issues have been raised about model panics and deviancy amplification. Number one, the key feature of a model panic is the disproportion between the level of public concern and the real threat that the deviant behavior poses to society. However, don't you think the entire idea, when we're using the word disproportion, how the word in itself, disproportion, is very subjective. I might think, oh, it's not disproportion. You might think, oh, sir, it is disproportionate. So the word in itself can cause problems. However, estimation of whether the level of concern is disproportionate hinges on a value judgment, and so is not a simple matter of fact. One. Number two, analysis or an analysis of deviancy amplification usually leave the original cause of the initial deviant behavior unexplored and unexplained. So no one spoke about what led to that behavior. All people care about is, oh, this happened. And the more the media sensationalizes it, the more viewership they receive, readership they receive, and the more panic this eventually or consequently has, or the more panic that there is within the society. Now, taking this further, if we talk about, since we're discussing all of this under the heading of a critique of moral panics and deviancy amplification, today with this day and age, there's the emergence, the popularity, the development of the new media, the internet, um, the way there's more of two-way communication, where we had discussed earlier, the reader, or sorry, the viewer is also a consumer. I mean, I'd given you an example of Instagram earlier. If you're just scrolling down, you're a consumer. If you're taking a picture and posting it, you're a producer. So today, with more of media literacy, today with more of platforms that actually end up facilitating consumers, today the cost of gadgets that help you use the new media reducing, technology improving, people or the consumer, the end user, we cannot just assume is very passive. So there are more literate. So we're talking about a literate. We're talking about a literate what? We're talking about a media literate audience over here today. So the appearance of interactive new media, according to Angela McRae and Sarah Thornton, 1995, has radically changed the relationship between the media and its audience, and has consequently undermined the overall impact of moral panics. This has consequently undermined the overall impact of moral panics. Audiences are allegedly now more sophisticated in terms of how they interpret media content. Competition between different types of media could be newspapers, televisions, 24-hour rolling satellite news channels, there being social media websites and applications like the Facebook, Twitter, blogs, Snapchat, Instagram, internet gossip websites, so on and so forth. This means that audiences now are more exposed to a wider set of interpretations about potential social problems and are consequently more likely to be skeptical of their moral panic statuses. Now, just spare a moment. There are numerous issues that the media, our local media, has been highlighting on these days. I mean, there are a couple that occur to me right now. I just don't want to name them. I'm sure your generation knows or is aware of them more than I am. So look at how the media is playing its role. There's one that has to do with a murder, drugs, a drug racket. Yeah. So look at the role media is playing here. I think I've said enough. The next point, these points notwithstanding, both concepts continue to provide powerful ways of understanding two significant features of the relationship between crime, deviance, and the media. Now, taking this ahead, since we just spoke about new media, let's talk about the connection between new media and crime here. The new media have offered criminals the opportunity. So the new media as helpful as uh, as helpful or as can't think of the right word. So the new media, as much as it has to offer to the end user, the consumer, the audience, this has provided criminals an opportunity to commit old crimes in new ways as well, such as there are terrorist attacks, terrorist offenses, but also there are opportunities to commit a wide range of entirely new types of crime. So number one, older crimes have been modeled to be done in a newer manner. Number two, there's a wider range of entirely new type of crime that wasn't thought of before, like hacking. Such offenses are known as cybercrimes. The term refers to any type of criminal activity that is conducted through or using ICT. Now, there are numerous examples. We could talk about cyber dependent crimes. These are crimes that can be committed only through the use of ICT devices, where the devices are both the tool for committing the crime and the target of the crime. An example of this over here could be hacking. Number two, cyber enabled crimes. If you talk about cyber enabled crimes, these crimes, they are cyber enabled. They take many forms. For instance, economic related cyber crimes, which include fraud and intellectual property crime, piracy, counterfeiting, forgery, so on and so forth. The next one, malicious and offensive communications such as cyberbullying and trolling is on the rise. Offenses that specifically target individuals such as cyber stalking and harassment, child sexual offenses such as online grooming, extreme pornography, and obscene publications. Now, these are some examples out of many others that we could write down about pretty much on our own. Yes, you could give contemporary examples. Yes, you could gain marks by writing these contemporary examples when you're talking about something that is relevant, when you're talking about something that is popular enough to be known by the paper checker, by the examiners. At the same time, remember, this particular topic that we just put an end to is connected to the topic that we had covered in the previous lesson, that was media effects, or the 5 different models that I'd even mentioned right at the beginning of this lesson. Know, if you're writing an answer in sociology, you don't have to be told while teaching each and every topic to you that you need to bring in perspectives. Now, whatever you studied right now, think how a Marxist would see it. Think how a traditional Marxist would see it, and think how a neo Marxist would see it. Ask yourself, question yourself how a pluralist would see this entire issue. Question yourself how a feminist would see this issue, and question yourself how a postmodernist would be seeing this issue. So, postmodernism, remember, knowing postmodernism, knowing how to apply postmodernism, bringing in or inculcating postmodernism into your answers would always be a cherry on the top. I hope this has been helpful. This officially brings this unit, the media, to an end today. Thank you.